Alright, so here we are to Brynn. Nice drawing, Brynn. I like the effect of light. You left off, or it looks like you left off the lines from the drawing, the dark lines. I think that's quite nice. Something I noticed is that you used the rough side of the paper. There's a sticker. In fact, I was looking at your drawing. There's a sticker still on the back. The side with the sticker is the side you want to use so that you don't end up with too rough of a texture in the face. I think it's okay for now, but just something to think about moving forward. This is a nice drawing. Overall, feels like the proportions are looking pretty good. Some things I would have you think about with value would be starting in this lightest area and then moving slowly towards the darker area, towards the opposite side of the forehead. Often it will appear that the forehead further away is lighter than it really is, and that's because it's closer to a darker value, and because of this idea of it's called simultaneous contrast of value. As you go closer to a dark, lights look lighter, and as you go closer to light, darks look darker. And so I want to be careful not to keep that far side forehead too light, or even this near side forehead too dark. In the context of the other lights, this side of the forehead looks very dark, but we want to be careful not to put it in the same area as some of these other darks, like the hair next to it. If you keep it too dark, it jumps too fast. So I like to just be more grouped in terms of the areas in light. So if I can keep them in a more similar range, then I won't overmodel. So we see some darks on the nose. I might just give them a little bit of light here to keep them in the light area. That lip. You need to be careful not to make it too light. Maybe down here we can make some of this core just a little bit darker. But the whole time I'm thinking of the light as it passes over the form. It's a little bit weaker. So on the front plane of this nose, I might make the value just a little bit weaker. This is not to be confused with the highlight on the corner of the form. Also look, the shape of the shadow here is actually larger. Inside the socket. Maybe we can take down the brow a little bit. The space on the forehead looks a little large. Might bring it down a little bit. This chin feels a little, there's something going on here. It could be just the shape underneath the bottom lip looks a little small. And then I think the core actually starts a little bit higher on the chin, something like this. And then I think the shape is a little bit smaller for the chin, something like this. Maybe a little bit. I can bring it back out just a little bit here. The rest of the drawing looks really nice. It's a really nice one. I almost want some of that dark line, but I can understand how you might not want that. I would maybe knock down the value of these bits of hair in light. I don't know. I don't think we don't really want them to be super light or like, same value as the skin. So I'll be careful to, just kind of knock them down in value. Maybe that's like your kneaded eraser and just pouncing them just a a little bit just to knock them down. That would give us a little bit better separation between the hair and the face. Something like this. Yeah, and other than that, it's looking pretty good. In terms of drawing, it still feels like this. Looking at it now, this nose is too big, and I think it's because it's too long a little bit. Looking at the looking at this negative space between the eye and the nose, before it just felt too long. This feels a little bit closer, I think, to what I'm seeing there. And then we can also take back this brow, I think, a little bit. It's more vertical, and then it steps back. Now, this isn't to say that, you didn't see this in life, because his position probably changed a whole bunch, but there's a little adjustment. I guess it's kind of a big adjustment, but just the nose was just a little too long. That's a very common thing for people to miss, making the nose too long. Very, very common. And now, I think since I did that the upper lip looks a little long too. Something like this. I believe it's just got too long through his face, and we just need to make sure those are relating to the other negative shapes, so something like this. Okay. Anyway, really nice drawing. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's go on to the next one. This is Allison. Nice one, Allison. I think this is pretty good. Looking at it, some things that I notice. I like the separation between light and shadow. Looks good. You definitely nailed those. You're definitely looking for those light shapes, which is awesome. And you also simplified the shirt, which I think is really good. Overall, the drawing feels pretty good. The proportions feel decent. Like there's not a ton sticking out at me, but I think the shapes themselves could be maybe a little more, a little bit closer to his shapes. Another thing I noticed is that the forehead is the same. The areas in light feel almost the same. We are getting that description of form, which I commend you on. It's going light to dark, but we can push the brown paper, because of his darker complexion, we can push the brown paper back into the areas of light, by erasing out this white pencil. This will help to turn the forehead just one more step. So now I'm going from the bright spot across the forehead, and then it turns over as it curves, this way. And that will start to show me one more level of depth. This is going to be true in terms of edge treatment for the other areas here, where his cheek is very soft and it rounds over into shadow. So I want a transition value in between light and shadow here. So this would be like using your pencil to do some hatching. And it's not to say that it needs to be brown paper, but I can use less white pencil, by doing some hatch marks, or just keeping it just a little bit weaker or less white pencil in these areas. You'll start to get a better description of form on the model. It's probably due to my explanation in class. Wasn't the best. You can see now that the Mr. Egghead principle, he's starting to round around this way, which is pretty good. he's kind of flat throughout. So this is something we would look at. It's going to be true on this opposite cheek. Softening to help it feel round. This far side. And then this far side cheek is going to be darker than the near side cheek because it's further away from the light source. See that? Let's use a little bit of the brown paper in and around the nose. It's all in light, but I would use less of that white pencil so I can start to describe what's happening there. I do the same thing on the brow, keeping a softer edge. Transition between light and shadow. Something like this. This way the value feels like it's wrapping over the form, flat forehead, and then it turns in and it goes flat again, and then it comes out, and then I want it to turn again. And so each point where it turns, where I want it to turn, it's a core shadow, and I want it to be soft edge. So that's that soft core, hard cast. Soft core, hard cast. So as I look at the lips here, I don't necessarily need a line in between. I want it to be soft core, hard cast, and then I get a little bit of a softer core. Make a little softer core and a little bit softer core. Something like this for the edge will help to start to describe form. In terms of the drawing, his nose looks a little skinny. Feels like his nose, for the width's sake, is wider. Perhaps it needs to move around a little bit, but feels a little bit wider and feels a little bit shorter than what's going on here. So I might just grab, let me exclude the ear. It's a little bit closer, I think, to the relationship. And then something going on with the top of his head. Feels not quite like the shapes that I'm seeing on his head. Feels more like maybe a little too big. Something smaller. It doesn't feel like he has a very large cranium. And then looks like maybe this side of his face is too far to the right. Oops. Shapes just feel a little wide. I'd also have you do an alignment on his chin. Let's do it in color. Front of the chin, that's kind of where the neck is. Front of the chin. So it's pretty close. I think it could come, and this is what happens when you draw from life, is the model's going to be moving constantly. But I'm just trying to, I'm trying just to assess where these things need to go. Here I butchered it with black line, but I think this might help. So these are little adjustments, little things to think about. So we're getting edge and we're describing that form just a little bit more. Okay, and then with drawing is be mindful of the shape and the relationship of those shapes to others. It's really good. I think he did really, really nice. Just a few thoughts. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's go on to the next one. This is Camarie, I believe. Oh yeah, look there. I think that's Camarie down there. Signature. Nice drawing. Nice effective light. I love the craftsmanship you have here. It feels it has a lot of integrity. It feels really good. I love these hair shapes. We also see Lizzie in the background. Lizzie in the background back here. Looking at the drawing, it feels a little long through the face, like there's too much distance. Oops. There. Wonder if we can do some measuring just to see what's going on. Let's just take a third here. So from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. And bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. And let's just move that sort of third up. Looks like maybe this one should be a little bit lower. Let's just see how that compares. So we can see that the distance from the nose to the chin here is too small compared to the distance from the nose to the eye, when the nose to the chin distance here goes above the eye. So that tells me that this may be too small compared to this, or this is too high up. And that was one of my suspicions, was that maybe this eye was a little too high. Let's do another comparison, just to see. So I'm going to go from the chin to the eye, or eye height. I'm going to go from the chin to the eye height. And I'm going to turn and compare that. And I'm going to turn and compare that. Looks pretty decent in terms of this eye compared to here. So that tells me that well, maybe it's a little far for the ear. Maybe this is not quite where it needs to be. But if this and this are comparing, but the bottom third and the top third weren't comparing, that tells me that possibly the nose needs to go up to match that third measurement. So let's see what happens if I take the nose and I move it up a little bit. Now what I'm trying to do is get the bottom third to match the top third while maintaining this relationship forward and backward. Still feels a little funny. Let's see. Oops. Let's try this third again and see where we are now. So now we're above that third. And if I do this one, we're above, but maybe a little too much. So I think that maybe this can come up a little bit. It's an interesting problem, and it makes it even harder because the light and shadow shapes are so different. You know, that she most likely moved or did something along these lines to make it harder on us. But looking at it, it still feels a little too large in this cheek shape and this nose. I think the overall shape is good. Just feels like the proportions are just a little funny. Feels like, just still feels like she's a little long through the face down in here. And her hair, it's just so different from the reference that I don't get a likeness, and the positioning on the head is so different. Like, the top of her hair, is so much higher and it comes down to the front, and this one does the opposite. And so that gives me a different positioning, and so I thought, well, maybe her head was positioned different. But then we see her chin, and her chin is coming up, and her chin is coming up maybe a little bit more. But what I might do is take the back of her head and try to bring it up a little bit for the likeness in the model, you know, turning up that back side of her head. That's the most common thing, is people tend to cut off the top of the back of the head, and it, you know, they lose brains. Leon would always say, you gotta make sure your model has brains in her head, you know, this kind of thing. So other things I'm noticing is the distance from the front of the face to the ear. Just looking at where the socket ends and where the hair begins, just feels too large. Wonder. Oh, actually, maybe that's what that dark shape is. Is this her hair? Or is this shadow? Well, either way, I would possibly eliminate this little light shape. I don't think it really helps. I think you're doing a great job with this edge through here. I might even soften it a little bit more down here. It's just so different. It's difficult to say where the light and shadow should go and where it shouldn't go. Still feels like this chin is just too big. I'm looking at the space from the bottom lip to the top of the chin. It feels so small, and this one just feels too large. I wonder if this would look more like Eden. I wonder if I can do like this. Also want to be careful and get a softening of the edge on the front of the brow. It's pretty soft, rounded shape here. And so I want to make sure I keep it, you know, not super hard edge, but just a little bit softer. It's the same thing on the eyebrow. Just softening that transition so as not to make it feel too kind of plastic or whatever. Same thing for the nose. There you go. Also be careful not to make all of the lights on the hair the same value. I would start with some brighter ones on top, and then I might just take a kneaded eraser and maybe knock down some of these lights that are further away from the light source, just to bring emphasis and clarity back to the face. So if I do something like this, I just kind of knock them down a little bit. The emphasis will come, the emphasis will come back on the face and not so much on the clothes or something like this. Just a few ideas there. So anyway, it's really nice drawing. There seems to be a little bit of difficulty in maybe finishing the drawing because of the reference. Try to make sure that next time when you're taking your photo that it matches at least a little bit closer to the model you're drawing, or the photo you take of the model matches your drawing a little bit closer, so so that you can start to understand and finish the drawing. That's something that, I think probably what happened is she turned a little bit to her left, or no, she turned a little bit to her, probably to her right, and so she needed to turn back to her left to get more shadow on her face. And that would be helpful to note moving forward. But really nice drawing. And let's go on to the next one. This is Marissa. All right. We got Kelvin here. And Marissa's drawing. Nice work, Marissa. We're getting that lighting effect. You tackled his hair. Got a lot of interesting texture and marks in there. I like the hair. A few things that we have to do is make sure that we understand measuring. It's something that we talked about, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, including myself. It's always something that, if I'm not conscious of, will hurt me in the end, if I'm not constantly measuring and checking. So something we're going to do is we're going to just compare on the model and then on the drawing some distances. So for instance, on the model, what I'll do is I'll hold up my pencil, placing the eraser or the tip on the eye, and my thumb will be down on the base of the nose. And then all I will do is I'll then move that up and see where that lands. If I do the same thing on my drawing, putting my transfer paper, or I can use my pencil in this case, it doesn't really matter, but one end of it on the eye, the other end of it on the base of the nose, and then move that up, I can see where that lands. And so right now, it actually feels pretty close. The forehead, I can see that the shape is a little bit different here on his forehead, so I might say, well, I can take this down just a little bit, but in terms of size, that feels pretty good. Let's take it the other way. Let's grab it and move it from, oops, I should have done that on a different layer. Let's try that again. Let me correct the forehead on a different layer. There you go. Now I'm going to take that same line and I'll move it down. So now we're at the base of the nose to the eye, and I move it down one, and I'm at just above the chin. We do the same thing over here. Move it down one, and I am above the base of the chin. Something I noticed was that his nose felt a little long compared to his lower face here. And here, by taking the measurement from the nose to the eye and moving it down and doing the same thing on the model, I can see, there is a discrepancy. This means that either I need to make the lower face a little bit longer, or I need to make the distance from the eye to the nose a little bit shorter. Looking at it, I think we can do a little bit of both, maybe. I visually, as I try to decide on what to do, I am looking at each shape and I am trying to decide which is most incorrect or most off. And so one thing I look at is the distance from the eye to the nose, like this, to the, we can go to the wing of the nostril or something like this. And then I look at this shape here, the same kind of shape. For some reason, that just feels so different to me. Looking at the eye to the nose, like this, feels too long here. So I might grab this nose. Looks like there you go. I'll grab this nose. And now I need to make it a little bit shorter. And luckily, I have technology, so it makes moving really easy. But this is something I would consider at the very beginning of the drawing, and be checking and checking before I jump into the light shape or adding value in too much. But now the lower face is too big, so we need to take the lower face and move it up as well. In this way, I'm making his face a lot shorter, but I feel like the shapes are coming closer to being where they need to be. Now, let's double check. Let's come here and let's see if the correction is where it needs to be. So from the base of the nose up to the eye. And we already have one on this other side from the base of the nose. Actually, it's a little bit high. Let's come here. There we go. Something like this. And now let's move it down one, and I'm to the base of the shadow on the chin. And if I do the same thing over here, I am to where the base of the shadow of the chin could be. So it's like the top of the chin, and this is more or less the top of the chin. So that feels better to me. Let's do one more just going up. And then do one more going up. Feels pretty good. Maybe still just a little bit tall up here, but pretty good. Okay. So looking there, I can start to see that there's a closer relationship between those parts. And I was using that negative shape in here to help me to decide on what to do, and that's, I think, really, really helpful. Let's do a few alignments. So looking at the model, let's drop some plumb lines. So I'm going to go from the edge of the nose straight up and the edge of the nose straight up. This feels pretty good. I think you understand alignments fairly well, in that whenever I do alignments, they're aligning really, really well. But I think the main issue is just, drawing. It's something that, or not drawing, measuring. And that's something that messes me up all the time. Now, the next step, or the next thing we need to consider is the shapes of what we're looking at. So we have a nice white pencil, but it's kind of over everything a little too evenly. We can, for instance, use the blue paper to help indicate the side plane of this nose. We don't need to make it completely blue. We can use some white in there if it is still in light, but we want to make sure that we're getting a distinction between the side of his nose and the front of his nose. Something like this could be really helpful in terms of describing form. Use the same blue paper. I think what you're seeing down here is some reflected light, but it's so weak that we want to keep it a little bit darker. So leaving that blue paper value is going to be good. And then as it wraps up over the cheek here, we can keep the edge softer by hatching and keeping that value somewhere in between the value of the blue paper and the white pencil. And that'll start to make that cheekbone feel a little more round. Looks like we need maybe a little more shadow down here. This is the difficulty of drawing from life, is we run into problems with consistency in the shapes, because the model moves. But since we have the photo, we can start to work with it. Then on the forehead, we have a really bright light on that front of the forehead, and then as it turns over and starts moving towards this far side, right, I want it to go a little bit weaker and a little bit darker. So not to say I need to go all the way to blue paper, but just a little bit of less white pencil, and I can start to describe the form of his forehead wrapping away and going away from me. A lot of times it doesn't look that way in life, meaning like the value actually often looks brighter as it approaches this far edge. Problem is going from where it's close to something white to where it's next to something dark, and that dark will make that light look lighter, and so we often keep that value too bright and it flattens out space. See that? See how it's starting to turn form a little bit? It feels like we got maybe too much light in his eye. Feels like maybe we can be a little bit weaker. Some of the lights we can put in the shadow underneath his lower lid. And then feels like maybe we can make the socket a little bit bigger, but I'm going to be careful putting in too bright of lights in and around the eye. It's so tempting to put in highlights and do this thing. But a lot of it looks like it's in shadow. Well, in this case, as I'm looking at the photo, but just want to be careful of that. Blue paper. I can use blue paper for his mustache. It is in light, but it's a darker value. So to indicate that, I can keep it that blue value. It starts to help. Something like that. I don't know what that is. Okay. More blue paper. I can't quite tell what's happening under his neck here. I think, though, that maybe we can take off a little bit of his neck and slim it down a little bit. I think that would be a little more flattering, like this. Or something like this. Just being a little nitpicky, being a little nitpicky now, but. So looking at it, we got to make sure that we're comparing distances on the model and on our drawing. As we start to add value, we're considering the form. thinking of Mr. Egghead, and so if I want to make a cheek round, I need a softer edge, and I need value. In terms of value, I don't want anything to be super white over a big distance like this, like the forehead or the nose or the cheek. I want it to start to help to describe form. Not to say that we need to go all the way down to, you know, super polar opposites like I've done, exaggerated everything. But in terms of describing form, this is a good way to move forward. I think this neck is, yeah, neck looks a little, the last thought is that this neck looks a little too far forward. Maybe we can put in some more of his collar down through here. Could be an interesting, slide that neck back, put that collar in. I think that could be a nice finishing touch for the drawing. A bit more line back here. And I'd be careful to put too many lights on his hair. It will make it just a little too confusing. So I might just knock them down just a little bit like this. Okay, so there's some thoughts. It's looking really good. Also, it looks a little bit like this ear is just too far back, maybe a little small. Something like this. And then maybe something like a little bit taller, a little bit larger. A few adjustments there, but anyway, let me know what you think, and let's go on to the next one. And we're to McQuinn. Nice one, McQuinn. Yeah, her slouching is a real problem. We need to get those model backs. You know, the chairs in the and behind the model. You know, they have these supportive rests. I think that will help with them slouching. Beautiful drawing. I think the only reason it didn't get more votes is the contrast level, and I think we can, you know, with this paper it's harder because it's a lighter value. But I might have you consider pushing the brightest of the lights lighter, and then maintaining your light fall off as it moves over the form. So it's still going to be darker over here, but now since I made the lightest light lighter, I can push the other lights just a little bit lighter. I think this would be helpful in terms of creating that contrast that I think we need here. So just pushing just a little bit in there would be good. Oh man, I did it on the wrong layer. Shoot. Let me see if I can't back up. Go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. We'll go all the way back. Oh well. Anyway, looking at the rest of the drawing, few things I noticed just had to do with the length of her nose and the size of it. It feels a little small and a little far away from her face. The lips feel a little bit larger, and that's what kind of was telling me that there's something going on. It just felt a little you know, different. And then the ear feels a little bit different from her ear. I might make it a little bit wider as well. Just looking at this nose, let's just to show you. Looks like maybe we can go a little bit larger. And maybe somewhere here. Oops. I don't know why it does that. Okay, here we go. Not that it makes a better drawing necessarily. When I looked at it, it did feel a little small and a little long, but I think this is more of her character, a little more of her likeness, you know. Um, when we look at this ear, I know most of it's in shadow, but I feel it goes like this, and then I feel like the end of it curves more up. Ugh, horrible, horrible. Um, you know, maybe not that much, but it does curve back into the ear there at the end, which would be helpful. And then, yeah, and then just pushing the value, oops, in the lights, if you can manage it, by pushing the lightest light just a little bit lighter. That'll give you more range to start pushing the value in these other areas. We'll get that contrast and we'll start to get that read. You did a really nice job on turning form, and really is a beautiful drawing. Just now, how do we make it look cool? How do we make it look a little bit cooler? You know, I might just use that brown paper instead of that black pencil to do the eyebrows, or maybe that is what. Maybe you do. You maybe don't have black pencil. It just looks like the brown paper. Maybe a little more brown paper for the edge of the eye. Yeah. Just the smallest of things. You're doing really, really nice stuff. There's just little adjustments here, getting her likeness, getting some more contrast in there. I won't go too much further because I know she had problems with sitting and doing all kinds of stuff, but really great drawing. Just those little tiny adjustments, and I think this is a portfolio piece. Good job, dude. Let's go to the next one. And this is, I believe, Natasha. Good drawing, Natasha. Looks good. I like the pink paper. I like the handling with the form. You're doing a really good job. I think some things I'm noticing is it's going a little bit quickly. The fall off the value is a little bit quick. So you can be a little bit slower in terms of that highlight dissipating for the form. We can let it fall off just a little bit slower. If I go too fast, the material will feel really glossy, and if I go from light to dark to represent plane changes too fast, it will look really glossy. And if I go slower, it'll feel smoother or more matte. And I tend to think most people look a little bit nicer with more matte looking skin. At least in drawings. Okay. Let's look at an alignment here. Gotta use a different color. I can't use red. It's on a pink background. The neck just looks a little too far back. Particularly this distance, it just feels too large to me compared to the rest of the face. So I'd say this one needs to go this way. I need to erase some of this. You can see how maybe a little too stretched out the head was, width-wise. Drawing's great. It's just a little bit of a difference between the height and the width here. You can measure more, you can do all these kind of things, but really it just comes down to numbers, drawing a lot, and also paying attention to negative shapes. When I looked at the negative shape here, it looked too big. So this shape just looked too big, a little weird compared to this one, right? And so that's something I just got to be conscious of, looking at, double checking, and being consistent. The other thing I see is the ear. This is a kind of consistent thing for most people. Is we got to make sure that ear tilts back on the head. That will help with the anatomy and the placement. Then as we look down into her nose, I think we didn't give enough room for the bottom plane of the nose. Be a little bit slower. Pink. And then the upper lip can jut out. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessary because I do know that the model moves, and this is you know, particularly difficult situation, but this is something I look at. The other thing I notice is that her nose is just too long. Looking at the negative space between her nose and her eye. This is so different. Yeah, this distance from the eye to the nose here in previous is just too long and too different. So we need to make sure we're doing something like this. So it's a little bit closer, a few ideas in there. Really nice drawing. It really is. I'm really happy with your progress. This is just consistency in drawing and just getting a little bit of that accuracy and proportion moving forward. Just keep practicing. You're going to do great. Okay, let's go to the next one. And this is, I believe, Shelby. I think this is Shelby. I think, or is this Rachel? Not sure, but I believe this is Shelby. Looking at whoever this is, it's a good drawing. I can feel where you're coming from in terms of the drawing. I can see a lot of good things happening. There does seem to be a little confusion in terms of light versus shadow. I like the hair. It's groovy. Luke's got cool hair. But there seems to be just a few things in terms of drawing as well as value. Just do a quick alignment here. You can see the negative space here, just too big. It's a similar shape, but comparatively it's just too large. Let's do another one from the back of the nose. Oops. Not horizontal. Vertical. That one feels way better. Looks like the mouth needs to come forward just a little bit. But that one feels way better. So let me get that. Oops. I shouldn't have done it on that layer. Something like this. And I think if I come back here, I'm going to erase this one for now. I'm going to draw in another one. Straight up. Straight up. And it feels like maybe it's just that chin needs to come back to make that shape closer. Like that. So it seems like there's just a few small alignments, just tiny stuff, but it looks good, like you're getting the alignments fairly well. Let's do some measuring. So I'm going to take the distance from the nose to the chin and the distance from the nose to the chin, and what I'll do is when looking at the model, I'll place my pencil on the bottom of the nose, And then I'll place my thumb on the bottom of the chin, and then I will move it up, and I'll see where that intersects. Now in my drawing, I have to do the same thing. I have to go from the base of the nose to the base of the chin, move it up, and I find that I am below the eyebrow. So that tells me that the distance here from the nose to the eyebrow is different in terms of proportion to what's on the model. If they're to match, this distance needs to go all the way up here, meaning that either I have to make the chin longer to compensate, or I make the nose shorter to compensate by about that much. Now, another thing I'm looking at to help me decide is I think the chin feels, well, somewhat okay. It feels pretty good. And the nose feels okay. But what we'll have to take a look at here is some negative shapes to help us decide. If I look at the distance from the eye to the nose and back up, this gives me a shape. And I'm going to about the wing of the nostril. And you can see this shape. To me, this one feels too long. Just too long here. Meaning that the negative shape is just maybe a little bit off in the drawing. So that's good. So let's go ahead and grab the lower half of the face. I guess I could just grab the nose to begin with. Let's just say just the nose. And it's got to come up and over, something like this. Maybe not that far over. Maybe it aligns a little bit better like this. And I can clean it up, or try to clean it up a little bit. But now I think this negative shape is starting to make a little more sense comparatively. I haven't quite got it to be the same proportion there, but we also just adjusted the lower face. So let's see what happens if I move up the lower half of the face as well. Now this would be something, it's too late to do it in the drawing now. But if I was doing these, I would do these at the beginning of the drawing as much as possible. So when it's still little lines, unimportant, incorrect lines, often I can get away with moving the whole half of the lower face and moving the nose around. These are the considerations that are always going through my mind. So let's move this one back. Let's come back. So now we're chin to nose, and then nose up. We're getting closer. And this one is chin to nose, and we're coming up. We're getting closer. Feels like it still needs to come up more. So I need to be careful here. Oops. Wrong layer. Put it over here. Okay. Still feels a little funny. Wonder if I put in a darker wing of the nostril and kind of that will feel a little bit better. Then maybe this is, maybe the top is too tall. Because we know that there's going to be an alignment. We know that there's going to be an alignment out of these guys. Now that's looking a little bit closer to me. So I think maybe it was all over, just a few smaller adjustments here. So in the future, it would be, in the early drawing stages, I would do that comparing as much as possible. Even when I think it's correct, I then go and I compare the lengths of, let's say, I'll grab the distance from the edge of his mouth to the edge of his nose, or the edge of his mouth to the edge of his nose. I'll do the same thing here, and I'll compare that to, say, I don't know, the width of his eye or something like this. Okay, so I'll take this one and I'll move it up and I'll say, wow, it's a little bit longer than the width of an eye. So then I come here, I'll do it on the drawing first, of course, and I say, wow, it's quite a bit longer. It's longer than the width of an eye, but by a little bit. And over here, it's not quite the same. It looks like maybe the eye can be shorter because of that. And I'll do that as many places as I can, and when I do that a lot, my accuracy comes up a lot. Now, as I draw as well, a lot of what I'm doing is visual. I'm looking at the model, and I'm making those assessments without needing to necessarily measure. It's especially true for these smaller shapes like the eye and this distance here. But visually, I'm constantly looking at those shapes and comparing, and that's something that you'll develop as you'll draw more and more, and you measure more and more. You'll start to realize you'll gain a greater visual acuity, and then you'll stop making as many mistakes. Now, looking at the value in here, we're getting reflected light. It's all part of shadow. We don't need any white pencil in any of this. We don't want any reflected light to have any of this value. All of this is shadow, so we eliminate it. So coming through here, we eliminate it. The small chin shape, something like this. Yeah, just eliminated. Now, looking at his head, I can see a light on the front of his forehead. It becomes weaker as it passes over, and then it becomes weaker as it passes over into the side of his head here. So I don't want it to necessarily be too white anywhere, but I want to push the lights in the highlights a little bit so that I can start to describe form a little bit better here. Also want a distinction between the front plane of his nose and the side plane of his nose. So I can just use that brown paper to help to describe that. As I work down, we see a light on his cheekbone. It hits on his cheekbone, and then as it wraps over, it becomes darker as it passes over his cheek. Comes down, hits the upper lip. Something like this. You get only brown paper in that top lip. And then we also need some transition in terms of, yeah, I painted this all in gray. It should just be brown paper, but transition through here starts to help us. Softer edge on the transition between light and shadow. There's a little bit of light on his ear. You can decide to either put it in or take it out. If it's not helpful, I tend to just take it out. I don't know if we really need that. Then what I might do to finish off is I might put some light behind his head just to frame his head like this. Maybe even a little bit of framing down here. I don't know about that bottom one, but just some framing can be a nice way to finish off and complement. To keep his head from falling off. There is light back there. There's white paper. It's good. So there's some thought. So make sure we're measuring and aligning. That's something we're going to work on moving forward and keep working on. And then in terms of using value, we're describing form. So we start with that spot of brightest light, and then as we wrap down, we get a little bit darker. So, yeah. Other than that, it's looking good. You're drawing. We got some nice drawing of the features. I mean, we can always be a little more specific, but I think you're doing great. So, anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and I believe that is the last one. So let's take a look. Yep. So thanks everyone for watching the critique, and I'll see you next week.